right, my baby. So it's recording time. Woot woot. Hear me out. Naturally, every time I record, I kind of start with some rants. But this is not a rant. This is one of those days where I was like, hey, man, I was supposed to get this done today. It's not like I didn't try. I actually got a lot done today. But this one thing kept kind of like showing me how much I don't understand it. So naturally, in my moment of frustration, I declare full responsibility for my actual lack of, I don't want to say awareness, maybe lack of insight. Because I think if I truly knew how it kind of worked under the hood, I would have been able to make something out of it even when I made a mistake initially. So maybe I could explain this better. All of us think, uh, I'm sure everyone's heard of imposter syndrome, right? So imposter syndrome is basically when you kind of like are looking at something and going like, I'm not competent enough to do it. The truth is, unless you've done it before, you probably have no clue how to do it. That doesn't mean your skill set is not adequate or supportive of it being done. So the cases of imposter syndrome normally happen when you're attempting something new and it's a bit bigger than you or bigger than what you imagine you're capable of. So naturally, for me, I laugh in the face of this kind of stuff. But it takes me a while in order for me to kind of like crack it. And I've debated with it many times before. Multiple times I actually like reflect on thought it, you're not like I always say that, like thought it you're not smart. So the first time you didn't understand it, it only makes sense. Smart people would understand it the first time. Second time you wouldn't understand it, fair. The third time, maybe you have to kind of like consider how you're approaching it. And naturally, I keep going back, and I don't go back with like a vengeance. I go back with kind of like maybe a little reflection of what I know, but ultimately just take it out of my mind completely, and then come back so that whatever's happening is kind of like set differently, right? Because the minute I look at it, different things are in my head, and specifically the things that make sense about it. And then from there, I kind of like fill the gaps. So my train of thought is simple. You have space from A to B. And to get from A to B is not really a straight line, but if we're imagining a direction between A to B, there are multiple points in between. And your goal is literally to fill every single point in between, every single point. Like, there's no empty space. There are points. So basically, if you, the, that's, I think, Socrates or Plato's allegory. So here's the thought. Let me actually discuss Plato's allegory. Plato once, I think, it is Plato. He said that if you actually, is it Plato, the one that discussed if you have the distance towards something, you'll never get there? Because ultimately, even when you get so fucking close, you're only traveling half the distance. So you're halving the distance, you never reach there because you're always halving the distance. Well, similarly, if you think by the end how close the distance is, that space, it's just basically like if you imagine the steps, how close to each other they are. That's basically what I'm saying. Like, from A, not having a clue, to B, fully understanding it. There are multiple things in between that are huge that you kind of have to comprehend, but to comprehend them, there are multiple things in between them and them and them and them and them and them. That's why basically when people say like understand the basics, what you're doing is you're kind of like instead of filling the line with points, understanding the basics means you can use these basics as like a full dash because you've already filled the points before. And naturally, when you find something that's a bit overwhelming, what you do is you kind of like destructure in the things that you know, and then you kind of fill them in the right blanks, and then you understand the major points of it, and then you connect to them. And then after that, suddenly you have like a full transitional thing which you can actually build in your mind. Fucking amazing, right? So naturally, that still hasn't worked with me. It's fine. But because of that, I kind of was like, shit, man, I kind of have to like get back to my roots. I don't know what my roots are, but I always remember my roots when I take responsibility. So what I did was I declared failure. And the minute I declared failure, it feels all the frustration in me, which I was kind of like trying to not let interfere with my mind because you don't really think straight when you're frustrated. Kind of like started flushing out. And it wasn't, I don't know if it was a beautiful moment, but it was one of those where I was like sitting there going like, now this is like a perfect opportunity to look at somebody who knows what the fuck they're talking about anything, right? And actually ask them, how do you deal with such moments? And there was none. Because the only person that was there was me. And whatever gives me energy, life, and love. And then it hit me in the head. I haven't actually like written to the world, to the universe in a while. And when that happened, I basically kind of like got all these frustration and emotion. It became a more of a like, it's like, whew, how do you explain such a thing? It's not, it's just super calm, right? It's just like all my frustration suddenly became calm, and I'm like, all right, so I know what I want to do next. And I instantly locked all my shit, left the coffee shop because there's air conditioning in the coffee shop, right? And I have to pay $3 every day for air conditioning. That's the price of coffee. And then I come to the house, and what I do is I start writing, and I basically reflect all the on my weaknesses and all the things that I'm actually like kind of like failing at. No need to mention strengths, man. That's a bias that you input, which kind of like limits you. Ultimately, you're always going to be stronger than you were yesterday or weaker. You get to decide. You can never be the same because we either intentionally move towards something or you passively move towards something. So I just reflected on my activities and a couple of other stuff. And I'm not going to say it felt good because good means adequate. But it did release my mind from certain like limitations, especially the stubbornness of not wanting to revisit the problem all over again, whatever it is I'm working on. And naturally, I'm working on code, yeah. The bigger things in life, I allow them to happen the way they are. I just like I can't control it, but because I'm building the website, so I'm controlling it differently, or at least I'm thinking about it differently. And here we are right now, basically. I realized that anytime I want to shoot a video, I need to consider the things that I failed on. That at least will allow me to kind of like isolate my rant so it doesn't go for a couple of extra minutes. Or at the very least, I would actually be able to like reflect through my words on the actionable things that I actually like tried to take and what are the things that I avoided because we emotionally are always going to be like, but I don't want to do that, but that's what you have to do probably, right? And it kind of surfaces them in a different way for me to kind of like interact with them differently, notice them differently, or at the very least just engage with their presence differently. Okay, so notice them differently, interact with them differently, and engage with their presence because they're there. And what we do is we kind of like look in the other direction. But around them, there are things that would actually matter, even if we don't want to interact with them directly. And so you pick basically what you want. Noticing something is beautiful. At the very least, you're acknowledging it's there. Engaging with its presence means you're acknowledging it's there and you're acknowledging it has an effect. Interacting with it is like fully just kind of taking responsibility for its existence. And at the very least, just placing yourself in the right position when it comes to it. I think what I just said is beautiful. I might have to watch this video again to repeat it, or I'll just like take a note. But ultimately, this is my rant about how I failed today. I actually succeeded in a. Also, it fucking highlighted beautifully the other things that went right. Uh, uh, just kind of like I don't know. Yeah. So that's my rant. I talked about a lot of stuff, but ultimately, if there is a way for me to just accept responsibility faster, or at the very least, at more opportune times. Because again, I could have stuck with this for the next week before I actually tried to like took a step. Like taking a step back mentally is different than taking a step back. Like completely. Taking a step back emotionally is different than taking a step back. And it's funny because like now that I'm thinking about it, there's like taking a step back physically, taking a step back mentally, and taking a step back emotionally. And these three kind of like adhere to the similar kind of like all three of them need to kind of like refrain so that when you come to it, you come with a fresh mind. Ooh, maybe that's what Buddhists and meditators talk about. Because ultimately, when you meditate, you detach. So when you come back, you're always coming back with a fresh perspective. Wow. So two things I actually said today that are awesome. All right, guys, it's a video. It's not a note though, but off-script adventures, let's call them. Peace.